First thing we're going to look at is sort of a baseline when this was the Schrader Ranch, managed more for cattle. Um, and so it'll be, maybe let's just do a little flyover just to sort of look at this draw. You can see, I think some of this vegetation in these draws were actively combated uh, when there were cattle here. So you can see a lot of trails and just a lot of evidence of stock. Um, and as we're zooming up here, you can see an area where um, a watering tank. So there's a lot of damage here. Start looking at some of the newer stuff.
This is kind of the first.
Alright, yeah, so this is the first image of some of the planting. You can see one of the areas we spent a lot of time was below that watering tank, and also all the draws. In this, yeah, this year I think we did just mostly planting. If we zoom up a couple years, you can see where we started. Um, maybe even go to your, yeah, that one. Well, I guess you can see here, after planting a year or two, we learned a lot, and we added a few more techniques. One of the real cool ones is MPG was working on a wetland, and it'd take out a lot of material to sort of bring it back to a wetland, and all that material, that woody material, we used and distributed through the draw, which did a lot of things. It acted like microsites for the plantings. It made it hard for the ungulates to walk around. Yeah, you can see back what it looked like without it. Um, and it helps a lot with erosion, slowing water, making it just a slower path for it. But like I said, for the plantings, it held the snow longer, created shade for the plants, kept the ungulates from walking, and then eventually over time, as it breaks down, it's providing nutrients for the plants. We found this to be real effective. Probably did this 4 or 5 years ago, and the plants around that are really thriving. There's rabbit brush in there that are 6 feet tall, and um, chokecherry and elderberry that have just outgrown all their exclosures and doing really well in there. If we could get a hold of more woody material, that's one of the things I'd like to do more of. Um, but yeah, you can just looking over the whole draw, and I guess let's go back and forth between the pre-R work. So that would be right here. You can see um, you can see a difference in vegetation for sure. Along both aspects, we've planted different types of species. On the southern aspects, it's a lot drier. It's a lot tougher. So we plant things like juniper, rabbit brush, mountain mahogany, bitter brush, and with them, we've had very little success without having to actively water them. So once we started putting these on drip, we started to get pretty good success, and they're really starting to take hold of the ground and reduce some of that erosion that these slopes were um, experiencing. We also used quite a bit of wood structures staked into the ground um, to sort of help give the plants a footing to take a hold of. Yeah, and then I guess you can see in this area right here, the flatter center area, we did sort of more of an orchard up in here. Those are all fruiting trees, some native, some not. A lot of apples and other kinds of fruiting shrubs. And here's a comparison. And this is all on drip, and they're doing fairly well. There's actually this year quite a bit of fruit, especially as we go on up over into this area. We're already getting quite a bit of fruit. And this is that old stock tank. Let's compare photos of that. Right in here, you got trees that are 20-30 feet tall. We got a mixture of cottonwoods, aspen, hawthorn, and all sorts of stuff. And obviously with that water, these have just taken off. We planted these as big trees, 10, 12 foot balled and burlap, but they've tripled in size. So obviously when you have the water, you can really get things to grow. Over in here, the ranch crew, they added these bucking rails, sort of the large areas, and that has helped really keep the ungulates out. And this is from the ground. This is a pretty impressive area. You can see here we were also picking areas to put down. Let's look more over here first because there's two different reasons. But right here, we do a combination for most of our average plantings where conditions aren't too wet or we aren't experiencing too much weed competition. We use wood chips, and those do a really good job of keeping moisture in the soil and outcompeting some weeds to an extent, not when they're real vigorous. But in certain areas, like over here, we would find whole patches of leafy spurge, and we would cover that with weed mat and then plant through, and it would in fact kill the spurge, and then that area would be have native plants instead. So that was one reason. But then also over here, if you come back over here, let's see, right over here, you can tell just from the photo that this is a wetter area and things grow better. And in those cases, the wood chips don't outcompete the weeds, and that's when we use the weed fabric. And we like to let it sit for a year, kill everything, make sort of a really nutrient-rich layer, and then we plant in the following year. And that's real effective when you have real competitive grasses and weeds to do that rather than the wood chips. But on the drier to medium sites, we found the wood chips to be very effective. Especially, they do outcompete the weeds somewhat, but mostly holding the moisture in, which is a big thing on the ranch. And then these exclosures right here would be more 6-foot fences. When we have big flat areas where we can, we like to do big exclosures with just a lot of plants in it versus the individual nets.
Can you talk about what was happening down here, kind of the goal with these plantings on this fan?
Okay, yeah. So in the fan here, the idea on the ranch is to make these corridors, if you look in the big picture, basically is a good corridor for wildlife to go from the floodplain up into the mountains. And so down here, I think we're trying to make this more, give it some cover so they can get into here and not feel so exposed, because we're starting to really develop some thick cover in here, and it's getting to the point where in a number of years this will be a connected corridor of vegetation. And so this floodplain, they're trying to make it a good place sort of as an entry into here, giving it some structure and some things to hide from and everything. And so these are doing fairly well. It's pretty, obviously, as you can see, it's a cobbly, rocky area, but there is some water down not too far. So things like elderberry have done really well, and when they establish, they grow really fast. But yeah, we've planted a large diversity of plants, especially up over here on this side right here. The ground is very good, and we have them on drip now, which after the first few years they were doing all right, but when we put them on drip, they really started to take off. But boy, we must have 15, 20 different species we've planted here, ranging from pretty dry to plants that like moisture, but the classic choke cherries, the rose, the golden currant, hawthorns, mock orange, elderberry, Rocky Mountain maple. Uh, I mean, there's a lot more than that too, but um, that site they've been doing really well. There's definitely some plants we planted there that are over 6 feet tall already. Um, yeah,
And then, do you want to talk about this?
that what the heck is that?